Alright, let us now solve problem number 5. Write an update statement that modifies invoice copy table. Change payment date to today's date and payment total to balance due for each invoice with a balance due. So this is where this difference between payment invoice total and payment total and credit is bigger than 0. And to set the date, you can use the getDate function. Now, a warning about this problem 5: if you write a query and you rerun it more than once, you are going to change payment total more than once. So that can be an issue. So I hope the problem is clear. Here is my code for it. Update invoice copies, set payment date to be get date and payment total to be subsetting by invoice total minus credit total minus payment total, where this difference is bigger than 0. Let's execute. Error near credit total. All right, now it works. Basically, I added the semicolon, and we have affected 11 rows. Let us see what happened to the invoice copy. Let's look for today's dates. I'm looking for payment date. Payment date. So some of them are current payment date. All right, that was problem number 5. All right, now let us do both problems 6 and 7. First of all, 6, write an update statement that modifies the invoice copy table. Change terms ID to 2 for each invoice that is from a vendor with default terms ID of 2. Use a subquery. So we have to query the vendors table for all IDs, vendor ID with default term ID equal 2. And then back in the invoice copy, we have to change in the corresponding rows terms ID to 2. And we can do this with a subquery, and we can do this with a join rather than some subquery. And that is what I'm going to show. So let me do this with subquery. For future purposes, I actually created yet another copy of invoice copy 1, and actually, invoice copy 1 from invoices. And the query itself is update invoice copy, set terms ID equals 4, where vendor ID is in, and here is the subquery select vendor ID from vendors where default terms ID equals 2. Am I sure I need it to be 4? Sorry, this needs to be 2. So I'm just conforming with the problem in the book. Okay, yes. Now it works. Let's execute it. All right, I don't think I needed to have is in there, so I changed that. Let's redo this. So first of all, this output corresponds to create an invoice copy 1, and this output corresponds to affected rows by our update statement. Now we also have invoice copy 1, and that's what we will use when we're doing the same thing with join. All right, and here is another SQL statement that does the same thing, and the same number of rows were affected. Sorry, I needed to use the other for clarity, I needed to use the other copy of this table. Let me rerun it. Okay, so yeah, the same number of rows is affected, and this statement does exactly the same, and it solves problem number 7 using join rather than query. And finally, let's do the last problem, number 9. It is the most interesting one. Write a delete statement for vendor copy table. Delete the vendors that are located in states from which no vendor has ever sent an invoice. So we need to, first of all, identify the states from where they were invoices, and then do not in. So we know the invoices from the invoice table, and if some vendor does not appear in the invoice table, this vendor have not sent any invoice, has not sent any invoices, and maybe from in some state, and the state information is in the vendors table and vendor copy table. In some state, there are vendors who never sent any invoices. All right, so let us understand this part. Located in states from which no vendor has ever sent invoices. So maybe we want to see the states from which vendors did send invoices. So those vendor IDs will be in both invoices tables and vendors table. So that's where I begin, and I write a quick query, select distinct vendor state from vendors, join invoices on vendor IDs. So this is an inner join. It will only select vendor states when, for this vendor state, there is a match in vendor ID in vendors and invoices. In other words, for this vendor, there was an invoice. And let me run it. Oops, sorry. My bad. Finally. So for this states, there was at least one vendor with an invoice based on this query. And maybe we want to quickly have a look and see if there are other states. So right now we have 10 states. How about we do left join instead and see if there are some states for which vendors are not listed in invoices. So let's run, and we have a lot more of such states actually. So now let's go back to the solution, to the delete statement. Delete from vendor copy where vendor state not in, and here is our query with join. This is all the vendor state for which there was at least one invoice for some vendor, and here we go. Oops. Okay, I highlighted again, so now this will work. Okay, 42 rows were deleted, and our vendor copy should basically lost 42 rows. And that's it for the week. Have fun with your lab now.